There are two great battles a man fights in his life. The first is the one to build a home, to fill it with love and noise and the smell of coffee in the morning. You spend decades on this, laying one brick of memory upon another. The second battle, the one nobody ever prepares you for, is the fight to not be removed from that home by the very people you built it for. I'm 91 now, and I've been fighting that second war for over a decade. It's a quiet war, fought not with weapons, but with stubbornness and foresight. It began when I was 80, when I started to feel the subtle, creeping horror of being erased while still alive. I saw it happen to my friends. One day they were a person. The next they were a problem to be managed. Their stories ended with a chapter written by someone else. I promised myself right here in this house that mine wouldn't. I would be the author of my own ending, right down to the final word. At 80, fear had become a permanent resident in my house. It wasn't a loud, sudden fear, but a quiet, creeping dread that settled in my bones. It was there when I woke up and my knees ached, a reminder that my body was becoming a stranger. It was there when I'd momentarily forget a name, a terrifying glimpse of a mind that was no longer a reliable friend. I was haunted by the faces of men I'd known my whole life, strong men who one day simply vanished into care, becoming cautionary tales whispered by their children. My own son, with all the love in the world, started using that same language. I overheard him on the phone one afternoon, his voice low and concerned. "Maybe it's time we looked at some options," he said, and in that moment, the abstract dread became a concrete threat. The war wasn't coming anymore. It had just arrived on my doorstep, disguised as a rescue mission. My house is more than just a house. It's a time capsule. Every morning I wake up not to an alarm, but to the way the sun cuts across the worn floorboards in my bedroom, the same way it did 50 years ago when Eleanor was still beside me. My first task, my first small victory of the day, is making coffee. I don't use one of those new machines. I have a percolator, and the sound it makes is the true heartbeat of this home. I use the same chipped blue mug she gave me for my 40th birthday. Holding it is like holding her hand. I'll sit in the armchair by the window, the one that has a permanent dip shaped exactly like me, and I'll just watch the world wake up. It's a simple routine, I know, but this routine is my kingdom. Each action, grinding the beans, checking the mail, noticing the stubborn rose bush she planted is still blooming, is a declaration. It's me, Arthur, telling the universe that I am still here. I am still the master of this small, quiet world I built with my own two hands. The silence here is a funny thing. It's not empty, it's filled with ghosts, but they're good ghosts. I can still hear Eleanor laughing in the kitchen or humming as she worked in the garden. But that peace is fragile. It gets broken every afternoon around 2 o'clock when my son calls. I love him more than anything, but our calls have changed. They used to be conversations. Now they're check-ins. "Did you eat, Dad? Are you taking your pills? Did you get out of the house today?" Each question is a little test, a gentle probe searching for a weakness he can use to justify his worry. I know he means well. I know his love is the reason he does it. But that well-intentioned love feels like a cage being built around me, one polite question at a time. He doesn't see this house as a home anymore. He sees it as a collection of potential hazards, the stairs, the old wiring, the solitude. He's looking at me and he no longer sees his father. He sees a problem that needs to be solved. And the solution he has in mind is the one thing I have sworn to fight until my last breath. The day it all changed wasn't dramatic. There was no storm, no earth-shattering news. It was a Tuesday, just after noon, and the only sound in the house was the gentle hum of the old refrigerator. I was hungry. I decided on tomato soup, the kind Eleanor always kept in the back of the pantry on the top shelf. I've reached for that can 1,000 times. But on this day, something was different. I pulled over the small wooden step stool, the one I'd made myself 40 years ago. I remember feeling a small, foolish flicker of pride as I stepped up, thinking how it was still as solid as the day I built it. I stretched my arm, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the can. It was just an inch too far. Instead of getting down and moving the stool, I did what a younger man would do. I leaned. I stretched just a little bit more. It was a simple, stupid miscalculation of a man who still thought he was indestructible. The world tilted. It wasn't a slow slide. It was a sudden, violent betrayal. The stool kicked out from under me, and for a split second I was airborne in my own kitchen. It was the longest second of my life. There was no time to think, only to feel a profound sense of surprise. Then came the impact. My hip hit the linoleum floor with a sickening, hollow thud that seemed to echo through my entire body. The can of soup I'd been reaching for flew from the shelf and clattered beside my head, a small metallic punctuation mark on my failure. I lay there stunned, the smell of dust and old floor wax filling my nose. The sunlight from the kitchen window cut a bright, indifferent rectangle on the floor just beyond my reach. The refrigerator kept humming its tune. The world hadn't stopped. Only I had. And in that deafening silence, a new sound began. The frantic, terrified thumping of my own heart. Lying on the floor, the first thing that came to me wasn't the pain in my hip. It was shame. A hot, suffocating shame that was more painful than any broken bone could ever be. I, Arthur, a man who had built this house, who had raised a family within these walls, was now laid low by a can of soup. I could hear my son's voice in my head, that low, concerned tone from the phone call. Maybe it's time we looked at some options. His words, which I had dismissed as loving but misguided worry, now sounded like a prophecy. This is it, I thought. This is how it begins. They'll find me here, helpless. The story of my independence would end right here on this cold floor. I pictured the paramedics, the concerned look on my son's face that would be a mixture of fear and justification. I wasn't just a man on the floor anymore. I was evidence. I was proof that he was right all along. It took me nearly 10 minutes to get up. Every movement was a negotiation with pain and pride. I used a kitchen chair as a crutch, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I was finally on my feet, leaning heavily against the counter, the kitchen didn't look the same. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a hostile territory, a landscape of potential betrayals. The top shelf was an enemy. The stairs I could see in the hallway were a mountain range I had to conquer every night. The very silence of the house, once a comfort, now felt like a vulnerability. What if I had hit my head? What if I hadn't been able to get up at all? The fall hadn't just bruised my body. It had shattered my confidence. The quiet war I'd been bracing for was no longer a distant threat on the horizon. The first shot had been fired, and it had come from inside my own home, from my own failing body. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that everything was about to change. The phone call with my son that evening was the hardest I've ever had. I tried to downplay the fall, calling it a silly little trip, but my voice was shaky, and he knew it. His concern, which once felt like a warm blanket, now felt like a heavy net being cast over me. "Dad, this is exactly what I've been worried about," he said, his voice a careful mixture of love and exasperation. I could hear the "I told you so" he was too kind to say. Every argument I had for my independence now sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I was no longer his strong, capable father. I was Exhibit A in the case for my own removal. We weren't talking to each other anymore. We were speaking from opposite sides of a courtroom. He was the prosecutor, laying out the evidence of my decline, and I was the defendant, with no defense left except a stubborn pride that was quickly turning to dust. I hung up the phone feeling smaller than I ever had in my 91 years. The silence of my house no longer a comfort, but an accomplice to my son's fears. The true unraveling happened a few nights later. It was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator for company. I wanted a pickle, a simple, stupid craving, but the jar wouldn't open. I ran it under hot water. I tapped the lid with a spoon. I gripped it with a dish towel until my knuckles were white and my wrist screamed in protest. Nothing. The jar sat on the counter, a glass and metal monument to my own weakness. And that's when I broke. I didn't yell or throw anything. I just sat down at my kitchen table, the one where Eleanor and I had shared thousands of meals, and I cried. I cried for the first time since her funeral. It wasn't for the pickles, of course. It was for the terrifying, undeniable truth that the threads of my life were coming loose, one by one. I was crying because I felt the first real, irreversible loss of myself, and the loneliness of that moment was a physical weight, pressing me down into the chair, into the floor, into the very foundations of the house I could no longer command. That night, sitting in the dark kitchen, something shifted inside me. The tears had washed away the pride, and what was left was a cold, hard clarity. My strategy of pure defiance, of just saying no to everything, was a losing one. It was the strategy of a proud fool, and it was leading me straight into the cage I so desperately feared. I realized my son wasn't trying to imprison me. He was trying to absolve himself. His plan to put me in a home wasn't just for my safety. It was for his peace of mind. And in that moment, I decided my peace of mind was more important. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store. It was the most humbling trip of my life. I bought a grab bar for the shower and one for beside the toilet. Installing them felt like a surrender. Every turn of the screwdriver was an admission of defeat. But when I was done, I looked at that ugly, sterile piece of metal on my wall, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the fall, a tiny, defiant spark of control. It wasn't pride. It was something better. It was wisdom. My new strategy began with those ugly metal bars, but it didn't end there. For the next week, I walked through my house, not as its owner, but as its enemy. I looked for all the little ways it could betray me. The loose rug at the top of the stairs, the high shelf where Eleanor kept the good china, the burnt-out light bulb in the deep, dark hall closet. I made a list. It was a list of my own weaknesses, written in my own shaky hand. Every item on that list felt like a confession. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. For decades, my pride was my armor. It was the thing that defined me as a man. Now I was being asked to lay it down piece by piece. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was dismantling a version of myself I had lived with for 91 years. I had to accept that the man who built these walls could no longer be trusted to navigate them without a plan. The war wasn't about strength anymore. It had become a war of intelligence. The real test came a month later. The light bulb in the ceiling of the main stairwell went out. It's a high ceiling, a good 15 feet up, and changing that bulb had always been a precarious job, even for a younger man. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up into the gloom, and I felt that old, familiar dread wash over me. The old Arthur would have seen this as a challenge. He would have dragged out the rickety extension ladder, his heart pounding with a foolish mix of fear and defiance, and he would have climbed it. He might have succeeded, or he might have ended up on the floor again, this time for good. But standing there in the dim light, I saw the situation for what it was. Not a test of my strength, but a test of my wisdom. It was a battle I was guaranteed to lose sooner or later. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the smartest move in a fight you can't win is to not fight at all. I picked up the phone and called my son. I didn't wait for his afternoon check-in. I called him, and when he answered, his voice thick with that familiar, gentle concern, I didn't complain or deflect. I didn't give him an opening to lecture me. I simply said, "The light bulb over the stairs is out. It's too high for me. When you come for dinner on Sunday, I need you to bring your tall ladder and change it." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a worried silence. It was a surprised silence. I hadn't asked for help. I had stated a fact and given a directive. I wasn't a patient in need of a caregiver. I was a homeowner delegating a task. In that one simple, honest admission of a limit, I took back all the power I felt I had lost. I had stopped fighting a pointless battle with a ladder and started commanding the resources I had at my disposal. And the most powerful resource I had was his love. Hanging up the phone, the house felt different. It was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not a menacing one. The shame I had felt since the fall finally began to recede, replaced by a profound, earth-shaking clarity. I finally understood the great secret of this war. True independence isn't about refusing all help. It's about having the wisdom and the authority to dictate the terms of the help you need. It's about seeing the battlefield clearly and deciding which hills are worth dying on and which ones are strategic retreats. Asking my son to change a light bulb wasn't a surrender. It was a masterful act of self-preservation. It was the move that ensured I would never have to make a panicked call from the floor again. I wasn't just avoiding a fall. I was preemptively dismantling my son's best argument for taking my home away. I had finally stopped fighting time and started fighting smart. That Sunday, my son came over. He brought his tall ladder, and without a single word of lecture, he climbed up and changed the bulb. He also brought groceries, the heavy things like milk and juice that he knew I liked but struggled to carry home from the store. As he put them away for me, I didn't feel like a patient being monitored. I felt like the foreman of a very small, very important construction site, the preservation of my life. We had become a team. He was providing the muscle in the younger eyes, and I was providing the decades of experience that knew exactly which floorboard creaked and which window needed a new seal before winter. That evening after he left, I sat in my armchair, and the house felt different. It was no longer a fortress I had to defend alone against the world. It was a home we were maintaining together. The fear that had been my constant companion for a decade finally started to pack its bags. I had spent so long seeing his love as a threat that I had forgotten it could also be my greatest weapon. I started to see my entire life differently, to redefine the very words I had lived by. For 90 years, I believed strength was what a man could do with his hands. It was lifting heavy things, fixing broken engines, building walls that would last a lifetime. Pride was the armor you wore to hide any crack in that physical strength. But I was wrong. My friend George, he was strong like that. His pride was so thick he refused to admit he needed help until it was too late, and the fall he took shattered him completely. True strength, I now understand, is foresight. It's the quiet wisdom to see the storm coming and to reinforce the windows long before the glass breaks. Those ugly grab bars in my bathroom weren't monuments to my weakness. They were symbols of my strategy. My list of my own frailties wasn't a confession of defeat. It was a battle plan. I was no longer a stubborn old man fighting a losing war against time. I was a general, surveying the terrain of my own life and making the strategic choices that would lead to a quiet, dignified victory. This new understanding brought a peace that was deeper and more resilient than anything I had felt before. It wasn't the fragile peace of a good day where nothing ached. It was the solid peace of knowing I had a system in place for the bad days. I still wake up to the sun cutting across the floorboards. I still drink my coffee from Eleanor's chipped blue mug. But the act itself has changed. It's no longer a grim act of defiance, a way of telling the world I'm still here. Now it's a quiet celebration. Each sip is a taste of a victory I earned not through brute force, but through humility and planning. I look out at the rose bush she planted all those years ago, and I don't just see a flower, I see a lesson. It survives the harshest winters, not because it's the strongest plant in the garden, but because it knows how to bend, how to conserve its energy, and how to lean on the sturdy trellis I built for it. I finally learned what that old rose bush knew all along. The great lie we tell ourselves is that the second half of life is a battle against time. It's not. It's a battle against your own pride. For years, I thought strength was about refusing to bend, about standing tall and alone against the storm. I watched my friend George do that. His pride was a fortress, and when time finally breached the walls, there was nothing left inside but rubble. He lost his home, his voice, his story. I almost made the same mistake. I almost died on the hill of a can of tomato soup and an out-of-reach light bulb. The greatest revelation of my life came not in a moment of strength, but in a moment of profound weakness, realizing that true independence isn't about needing no one. It's about having the wisdom to build a world where you can still be the one who decides what help you need and when. This fight for your dignity isn't won at 91. It's won at 60 with foresight. It's won at 70 with humility. It is a quiet, strategic campaign you wage on behalf of the person you will one day become. This morning, I woke up in my own bed. I made coffee in the chipped blue mug Eleanor gave me, and I sat in this very armchair, the one that holds the exact shape of my life. I watched the sun rise over the rose bush she planted, the one I can still tend to because I had the sense to ask my son to move the heavy bags of soil. These small moments are not accidents. They are not luck. They are the trophies of a war I won by choosing to be smart instead of just being strong. This house is no longer a fortress to be defended. It is a home to be lived in, a testament to the fact that I am still the author of my own days. So I will leave you with this, the only piece of wisdom that truly matters. Don't wait for the fall to look at the floor. The battle for your ending, for your dignity, for the right to drink a cup of coffee in your own kitchen, it doesn't begin when you are old. It begins right now.